Raz, we're back.
Hey, we're back.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah,
and
nice.
we have
Shirts.
same shirts.
Matching
Yes.
shirts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're trying to set the stage and trying to have the right trajectory.
There you go.
So we already have the shirts.
Yes.
We already have the frame, and I think we have the.
And we have a
the
guest. We have a guest.
There you go.
Before we start, I'm going to plea to our millions of people out there that watch us, please subscribe. Some of you, it'll help us out on YouTube a lot. If you can do that, that would be great. And thanks for everybody who has been watching stuff. The YouTube stuff's climbing for us, which is fantastic. And it'll be fun to talk about video because Paul's here. Paul Meyers. We met in Singapore at a Muru-D beer night.
Probably,
I'm pretty
yeah,
sure, even though I saw you around JFDI and other places. So Paul's another one of the, and I had a chance to talk to Rob Beer because we're trying to get him on, and I think we're going to get him on. It's confirmed. And one of the things I told him is what's happening during some of these conversations is a little bit of a history lesson about Singapore, which I think is kind of fun. So I think
one of the things we want to do. We want to bring Singapore and understand what's the power behind it. So I think it's.
And I think you're one of the people that are in that mix and kind of, so it'll be good to hear about that. So Paul, Muru-D, you've been in the video industry. You live in Bangkok now, but you used to be in Singapore for a long time. Let's kind of rewind and just go back to when did you first come to Singapore and why?
Okay. Sure. Well, happy to be here. Nice to meet you guys.
Oh,
So this will be fun. I initially came to Singapore in 1989 was the first time I came on my honeymoon on my way to Bali, and I liked it. I had a film and video production company in San Francisco in Silicon Valley, and I was working for a lot of the big tech companies, which at that point were manufacturing in Asia, not so much selling, but your hard drive manufacturers and Apple and Motorola and those guys were here and some of the big mainframe companies that are long gone. And I kept getting sent to Asia to make films about, manufacturing processes and stuff like that. And I really, really liked it. And so I raised some money. I raised my first money. That's when I wrote a business plan and I raised money to expand. And I looked at Hong Kong and Singapore. And EDB, every once in a while, they cycle through different industries that they want to attract. And at that point, Hollywood of the East was happening. And I drank the Kool-Aid and I came here. And I ended up being here, 32 years. So that's what brought me here. Yeah.
That's exciting. And was that continuous for 32 years? Did you bounce around? Or?
No, it wasn't. I was in the States again for about 18 months where I did kids' educational CD-ROMs, if you remember those. A lot of this is pre-internet, right? So, and then I got hired to set up an animation facility in Vietnam in 94, 95. And at that point, it was just starting to open up again. And what not too many people know are that the French trained a lot of animators in Vietnam after World War II, and there was this very vibrant animation industry there. And then the various wars and conflicts and stuff, and those people kind of drifted off and on. I worked for a guy, an American, who was doing artwork for kids' educational CD-ROMs, and so the idea was to find these artists and bring them back and train them to do the artwork for these products. And so we did, and we went all over Vietnam to find these guys who were 50, 60 years old who had trained with the French, and some were living in dire circumstances, and some had no teeth, and some had the money under the mattress, the whole bit. And we brought them back, and we taught them how to use Macromind Director, if you remember Director. Okay, and they draw and scan, and then we'd make the animations that way. And it was great. It was one of my favorite jobs because if you've ever worked with and managed artists, it's a whole different thing. It comes from here, right? So I did that for a while, and then I came back to Singapore, worked for Asia Business News, if you remember Asia Business News, and I was head of multimedia.
I actually don't.
Okay, it's the precursor to CNBC.
Okay.
It was bought by GE and NBC and merged into it.
Started where, ABN?
It was started here in Hong Kong.
Oh.
It was Singapore and Hong Kong.
God.
And it was, in the early days of cable and satellite, which was early to mid-90s in Asia. It was one of the first regional news networks. And I did that and set up a product that led a team to build a product that delivered streaming television news to your PC. So pre-internet, this is pretty wild, you know. And we did that, and I raised the other shareholder was Dow Jones, and they didn't want to invest in it. So I learned how to go out and talk to VCs at that point. Wow. And I raised $5 million. And at that point, VCs were like what we see as CVCs now. It isn't anything like it was. So, you know, your VCs were Intel Capital, GE Capital, those kinds of companies, and a couple of, you know, maybe sovereign wealthy kind of things, but they were very big. And I learned to do that, and I raised $5 million.
And you raised that in Asia? Or you
that was all in Asia. That was all in Asia, yeah. And then we raised the money, and then GE and NBC bought us, and we all got fired like the next day. And all of that disappeared, you know. But it was great. I mean, I learned a lot, and we did some really cool tech. And helped start an internet company, co-founded an internet company, which at that point started with 4 of us and ended with 650 of us in a NASDAQ listing. It was the whole 2.5-year rocket ship there. And we brought Western media brands to the Asian internet space, so brought CNET to Asia. I am the godfather of MTVAsia.com. I started MTVAsia.com, did a big deal with Viacom in New York to bring all those rights to Asia. And then we did localized versions. So we set up 8 different countries and 8 different localization kind of operations and sales. So eOnline, Sports.com, what was a separate company at that point, DoubleClick. We brought.
Did you do with Thailand MTV as well?
No, that was part of MTV Southeast Asia, okay, and this is only the online, you know, the online part of it, and the mobile part, which there wasn't any mobile at that point, but we had the mobile rights, and we did all of that, and then went public on what unfortunately is still the second worst day in the history of NASDAQ. When the internet bubble burst, and so we were all wealthy in the morning.
99 something.
Yeah,
2000,
April 99.
Yeah.
You know, we were on the trading floor at Goldman Sachs downtown.
So you went to bed going woohoo and wake up?
I was there. We were in New York, and we did the whole thing.
Wow.
Yeah, and then, you know, we went. 2 companies went public that day, us and Krispy Kreme Donuts, and one went north, and the
other.
One
of the best donuts.
Did they have donuts on the floor?
No.
Oh, come on.
No.
My favorite donut.
But we had the sign, you know, the NASDAQ. I mean, it's all very heady and exciting. But, you know, that was it. That was really when the bubble popped. And, you know, I was gone in 6 months, and the company was gone in about 18 months. It was just,
crazy ride.
Learned a lot. I mean, that's where I raised like $60 million doing that. And I did these big deals, and I learned how to do the big deals, and I learned how to set up and manage teams remotely across Asia. It was really crash course in business, right? Because I came at it as a filmmaker, right? And that was my background. So I learned how to do business that way.
I'm listening to your journey, which is fascinating. And I'm thinking about the young American from Silicon Valley thinking he wants to be in Singapore, and there is a clash with the culture. It's not the same thing. You don't do business the same. You don't speak the same language. You have like different mindset. Even setting meetings are different. What are the top 3 things you would say for this like young girl or young guy that want to do business here? Which type of culture, you know, remarks you're gonna give him?
Shut up. Just don't talk. You know, listen. Like, you know, you think you know everything. You don't. I mean, I was that guy, so I think I can say this. You know, listen more than you speak. Right? You don't know everything, and you may know your domain well, but you don't know about the cultures. And cultures vary. I mean, very widely in Southeast Asia, and I think for many Americans, certainly at that point, you know, Asia was this monolithic place. Asia was one thing. It wasn't Japan and Thailand and Indonesia or Java and Sumatra, or, you know, you can break it down even more granularly. It was, you know, one place, right? So just learning what the different cultures were and the different cultural kinds of do's and don'ts and what to say and what not to say. I think listening is one of the big things.
And how about transactions, like American versus people, let's say in Bangkok or Vietnam? How they deal with transactions?
Well, yeah, transactions are very different. I mean, I think the American, certainly when I left, and I haven't been there for a number of years, but when I left, it was very much, you know, I win, you lose, right? It was zero sum. And I don't think that's the case right now. And it certainly isn't in the deals that I did in Asia. I mean, everybody needs to win, and everybody has to have face. Face is very important, obviously. And so you want to come out of a deal where people are feeling good and that they have something to work with, right? But that's all things being equal. If you coming in like the American guy coming in and all of a sudden you realize you're not at the advantage, right? That you're dealing with this giant conglomerate, and you have like your little product there, then it's a whole different kind of thing, and you have to listen and you have to talk and you have to figure out problems where maybe that wasn't the case so much in the States.
This topic actually give me a segue to you have lots of different gigs.
Yeah.
You just you put nuggets. Yeah. I did that. I did NASDAQ. But I want to touch point on two that we love to speak about. One of them are the documentaries, and the second one is ABM. Tell us more.
I trained in documentary filmmaking at a small school in Western Massachusetts, the same school that, who's a big documentary filmmaker in the States? Ken Burns. Same school that Ken Burns went to. Okay. And so documentary was it. And I made these great documentaries, but at that point it was pre-cable, so you couldn't sell them. There was no, like there were 4 people in America making money making documentaries. So I got into news and those kinds of things. But what I learned in documentary, which has served me well throughout my career, has been the ability to ask questions, become a really good question asker, and then also to become a very good listener, which has served across all of the different jobs that I've had. I think those are, I wouldn't call them superpowers, but they're strengths that I have, right? And so that gave me the confidence kind of to talk to anyone, right? Whether, I got to interview Henry Kissinger back then and, John Young, who ran HP, or, some of the big Silicon Valley big cheeses at that point. I was confident in being able to ask questions, right? And then shutting up and letting people talk and going from there. And the other thing I think that was great for me, and I still think works now from making documentaries, was it combined learning and making, right? And I realized that learning and making are things that are important to me in the jobs that I do. And I always try to incorporate both of those things into what I do.
How did that even kick off to where you were like, let's get into the news business on cable?
Me personally? Well, it was attractive. It was a job. I was out of work. I knew some people who worked at Dow Jones. That was kind of how I got in, really. But it was very, to me, I knew the technology. I knew news. I was a TV news editor in Washington, D.C. for a number of years. So I had news chops and news experience. And this is pretty heady because it was pan-Asia. Satellite coverage was just coming in. Digital satellites were just coming in. All that new technology was just starting to happen. And households across Asia were starting to get cable, right? So it was very, very exciting to be a part of that. And the guy who was running Asia Business News back then, Paul France, he had a big vision of how to use digital and how to do these new things. So he was always really supportive of trying new stuff out, and it was a great gig. It was really fun.
And then CNBC buys it, and then
they merged. And so CNBC back then, remember MSNBC?
Yeah,
so
MSNBC.
Microsoft had the interactive bit. So any interactive legacy, we were
in so quickly,
like overnight. You're like, okay, goodbye, thank you.
And what is your take in when you see the news kind of things happen today, where now there's just a few players? You have the Al Jazeera's as well. Like what you guys were trying to do then was kind of different in that you were the first one to say it's like all Asia broadcast globally. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's not quite like that now, right?
No. And part of it's TV. There's the whole television industry or the television news industry, right? It's not nearly as big as, well, we've been hearing with this past election about podcasting and, how big the audiences are on podcasting, right? And it's been supplanted a lot by the internet. So, yeah, you have the legacy CNN or Fox or Al Jazeera or BBC, but a lot of the smaller players are gone just because there was consolidation in the industry, and even that viewership's still going down. So there are many people who think it's a sunset industry even now, right?
Everything's shifting to TikTok or
TikTok, right?
Yeah.
I mean, my kids don't watch TV news.
Yeah.
I don't even watch TV news anymore, right? I get my news from other sources.
YouTube.
Not
YouTube.
TikTok, but from other sources.
Reels.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
it's fine. Different. Yeah.
YouTube. Now we're going to fast forward a little bit.
okay.
Zip forward in time. But I think it's interesting because we'll get back to some of the things you do today. And it sounds like documentary filmmaking and coaching are
Very far
connected.
apart. Yeah,
Well, they're far apart, but you're asking questions and listening.
Yes.
Huge part
Yes.
of coaching. So
Yes.
I find that's an interesting,
It's really helped
chord.
me in coaching. It's really helped me in coaching.
but we'll dig into that.
Okay.
So let's jump into Muru-D.
Wait, in between, I started 4 or 5 companies.
You
too.
did. If you want to touch on that.
Just that I've done that whole raise money, build a company. Some were successful, some were unsuccessful, some crashed and burned. So that's where my coaching kind of experience comes from.
Yeah, the
Yes.
school of hard knocks, which
Yes.
makes you, I think, a relevant coach to founders in an industry where sometimes
I'd like to believe that. Yeah.
people aren't relevant. But the reason I want to talk about Muru-D a little bit is because I think from a history lesson, I actually don't know how it came together other than I know it's a Telstra thing, but kind of how the Singapore thing came together. And at the time that you guys were doing it, you're one of the only, right? I forget if this is crossing paths with JFDI.
It's kind of simultaneous.
Yeah.
So the accelerator business world ecosystem, whatever that was, really kind of took off in the 2010, around there, around that era. As venture money became more available, right, as did accelerator programs, there was a realization that founders needed help, and there could be these entities that provided support and building skill sets and introducing them to potential funders. And so there were a bunch of accelerators that came out. And there were different kinds of accelerators. Some were private, like JFDI, which was the first one here in Singapore, I believe.
Yep.
Had private and government money. Okay, but then there were other ones that were corporate-based, like Muru-D, which was part of Telstra with the Australian telco, right? Each had kind of different goals, right? That a JFDI wanted to create startups that went out and did their thing. They may have been vertical specific, not JFDI, but some of them were vertical specific, cargo or chemicals or whatever. But then the corporate ones was little different. Like companies, big corporations wanted to look like and actually try to be innovative, right? And part of that was have an accelerator program and have innovative, generally young people doing cool stuff energetically, and you could point to it and say this is really working. But then what happens after that? Like, is the goal that they make money for the company, right? Is this going to become a revenue center eventually? But startups take generally 7 to 10 years to pay off. So most corporations didn't bring that into the equation while they were doing it. Or another model was, we're only going to focus on companies that specifically help our business.
As a telco.
As a telco, right. Telstra was actually pretty enlightened about this. What they realized was a teeny-weeny company is not going to really affect a giant telco that much immediately. So what they did was they took the innovative products that came out of Muru-D, which was started in Australia, and there were 5 branches, eventually 4 in Australia and us in Asia, to help sell the products to their clients. Okay, and say, here are some kinds of other things that Telstra can bring to the table. And whether it was telephony, or whether it was television, or whether it was, all sorts of different kinds of technologies. There were just different kinds of things that they could offer their clients, which I thought was very enlightened and wasn't like most corporate accelerator programs.
Are you surprised they shut it down?
Telstra had a couple of bad years, and I could see from a corporate point of view, we were in Asia. We were not the core market. We're investing all across Asia. And although our budget compared to the overall spend at Telstra was pretty negligible, when you're cutting dividends, that's how it works. That's how big companies work. So
yeah, and I think you probably know the portfolio better than I do. I think one of your more famous ones that come out of it is ShopUp.
ShopUp, yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't remember that because Accelerating Asia is not too long after. And
Correct.
Like they're in PrioShop, which is, we had Askell on, right? But ShopUp is got to be the superstar out of the whole thing.
Yeah, definitely. And they were very, very small. I mean, it was just like a handful of people at that point. Smart, but physically getting them to Singapore at that point was really difficult. I mean, the Bangladeshi government needed to sign off on them coming, and we required their to be set up in Singapore and to be domiciled. The company.
That was a requirement of Muru-D to write a check to work with them.
Yeah. And I think for most accelerators now and most VCs, you need to be domiciled here because. We love Bangladesh, but investing into Bangladesh is very difficult right now. And Singapore has done a very good job in making it easy to invest in Singapore. So,
when you look at the founders' eyes, what was the moment you said, "This team was gonna be a killer"?
He was just really serious.
Talk about Afif, right?
Yeah, Afif, and Afif was really good about asking for help. He had a vision. but he's always like, how can I do this better? How can I learn that? Where do I find out about this? He was full of questions all the time, and that was remarkable about him. You know, I mean, you've met enough founders that not all founders ask questions all the time, but he was like just a sponge, and it was really clear that he and the company were going to go someplace. Even if it wasn't this company, you could just tell from him that he asked those kinds of questions. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll do a little like cleansing of regret during these shows. So remember, I was at Seed Plus,
right?
That, and we could have had his full post Muru-D seed round.
Wow.
And it didn't work out.
Yeah.
I won't get into why it didn't work out, but
it's always like easy to look back.
Oh, it is,
Right,
but still,
right.
like, and I don't buy this anti-portfolio thing. Don't get me wrong, but you do know that, like, for the people that are involved in deals, there's a point that you're actually in the deal. You're involved. You're doing due diligence. You're putting terms out. That to me is different than the ones that are like, oh, I met the guy, I could have had it, which is
Right.
not what I'm saying in this case. In this case, we were deeply connected, Muru-D. I was at all your networking events.
Right.
We got to know Afif, and it just certain circumstances prevented it from working out, but it could have been. And it's one of the ones that
Woulda, shoulda,
probably
coulda,
would have
yeah.
been the biggest one.
Oh
in
yeah,
our
for sure,
fund.
for sure.
And I know there's a few people in the Singapore ecosystem, when you say shop up, they'll get a big grin on their face, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of angels that you and I both know that are in
Yep.
it. Some of which we also need to get on the show. Afif is somebody we need to get on the show as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
So,
He's really interesting, and he's done a super job. And
Yeah.
you know, he grew it this way and this way. He's
yeah, and I
really
think
done
their
very well.
intent is to try to go public.
Yeah, they want to
Then-
become the first Bangladeshi company to go public in the U.S. Yeah,
and
that's their goal.
I'm editing Mustafa's episode right now. Mustafa Rashid.
Right, right.
Yeah. So he talked a lot about this as well, and he actually talked a lot about how hard it was to be the first couple that were in Bangladesh, trying to get domiciled, trying to fly, trying to
it
set
was
up bank
crazy.
accounts.
It was just
Like,
crazy. You know,
what did you guys do to make that happen? Like
everything we could. You know, like I said, Singapore government's been very good about creating this ecosystem here, but not all of the programs that we see today were in existence 7 or 8 years ago, right? Or their predecessors were. So the idea of bringing a founder in from a place like Bangladesh, no one had done it. So, you know, it was like, oh, how do we do this, right? There's no program to do this, right? There's no easy on-ramp, which they've since built. But at that point, it was, I don't know.
Yeah, I remember
how do we
talking to
do this?
Fif, like, even he had to get special permission, that the Singapore banks were okay with opening an account for him, but he had to
Yeah.
get permission from Bangladesh to actually be an account holder of a Singapore account.
Oh
right?
yeah, it went all the way up. I mean, it was like, you know, the finance minister had to sign off at that level. I mean, it was
Wow.
like, it was way up there, which was stunning to everybody, right? That it had to go that far, because again, on that side, they'd never done it, right? So.
It's even like a bigger achievement now when you look back.
Oh yeah, I think the logistics of that were indicative of all the different kinds of things that he had to go through. But these cool, calm,
But I think you
collected.
touched on this when you talked to Mustafa. It creates this, like, if they get over that wall, these other walls seem very easily surmountable.
Yeah.
Because they came out of something that was, like, you would say almost impossible to do, like domicile here, get a bank account, get the rights to fly in and out all the time. You know,
Yeah.
he had to cross all that just to have a startup.
just to get into the accelerator, right?
Yeah.
Which is then like the starting place, right? So yeah, I mean, it was pretty impressive.
You were touching about coaching and how's being a filmmaker and a coacher and coaching. But I want to take even like a double click or even deeper on that.
Okay.
Okay, because when you want to do other stuff, there is a moment that you say, this is what I want to do.
Right.
How did you decide now to do coaching specifically? Because you can continue to do documentaries or things
Sure.
or other stuff. This is one thing. It's separating the two. The second thing is when you're coaching these founders, how do you assist them, or do you see any mental break or mental assistance that they need with your coaching?
Right. Okay. Two very different questions. So let me
Let's
start with
for
the first one.
one.
Yeah. I'm kind of the don't try this at home school, in that if I see something that is attractive to me, I follow it and I just do it. I jump. okay, for better or worse. And so I went from a filmmaker in Washington, D.C. I moved to California, even though I had a great career in D.C. I was in California. I was doing really well. Let's move to Asia. I moved to Asia. Let's get out of TV and start this internet thing. So I'm very much that kind of guy, right? And some worked and some didn't work. And it was never boring, right? And that's kind of me. That's just how I am. That I found something that I was attracted by, and I thought, okay, I could do this. Let's give it a go. And so that's what got me going. So what got me to the coaching stage was I just wrapped up at Asian Development Bank. I had helped them build their first venture fund, ADB Ventures. That contract ended, and I'm like, oh, what should I do? And I thought I'd take a couple of months off to think about it, and then COVID hit. Right, so I had a lot of months to think about it, right? And I talked to a bunch of people, and I thought, I have all this experience, I have all this knowledge. I like helping. I've always taught courses throughout my career. I've always tried to share. So it seemed like a natural step. Also, I kind of looked at Silicon Valley, coaches in Silicon Valley, and at that point, a lot of, if not most, founders had coaches, and it seemed like a good business and a supply and demand, and I knew the ecosystem here, and I thought, okay, this is something I can do here. Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then I kind of jumped in, and since I'd never been coached, I thought it'd be a good idea to get a coach. So I sort of knew what I was doing, right?
But during your career, basically, a good coach, that's what we studied in the previous episode, know how to ask the relevant questions.
Right.
And I think this is one of your strengths.
Yeah, and I like asking questions. And so, well, I mean, you've trained as a coach. A lot of coaching is I ask you questions, and then the answers come from you. And my definition, the difference between mentoring and coaching is, coaching, it kind of comes from you, and you have the answers in there somewhere, and I help elicit them, right? By asking questions or not asking questions. Where mentoring is much more like boom, 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 boom. Yes. Here's how to do something, right? And mentoring, I think, can be very finite. You're task-based, help me raise some money or help me hire a CFO or something like that. Where coaching can be ongoing, right? It doesn't have an endpoint. So I find that coaching and founder coaching specifically, is probably about 70% coaching and about 30% mentoring. Because a lot of the founders will say, I don't know, how do you do this? I need help doing X. I need help with a pitch deck. I need help hiring. I need help expanding to another territory. I need help with a new product line. Do I keep it or get rid of it? So that operational background, the operational skill, I think is what I bring to it, right? And then I ask questions, okay, as well.
Yeah, which is important because sometimes as a founder, they want you to help them. And if you would say, hey, sorry, I'm the coach, I cannot help. So I think I'm wondering, I think they might want it to have this operational, experience and understand that. And now when you look at these founders and working with them, I'm going to the second part of the question.
Right. Okay.
Do you recognize or view any mental things that need more support with their work or mental breaks?
It's hard and lonely, and difficult, and often a lot of founders, there's a bunch of things here, so let me try to break them down. On one hand, on the emotional side and the personal side, it's lonely, it's difficult, there's a lot of no's, and it's long. It could be 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 years of doing this, and most of the time you're hearing no, right? So there's just that, the mental strength, like with Afif, the mental strength to be able to do this is difficult, and trying it sometimes, and we could all be really strong, but there's sometimes you're like, and at home, if you have a partner, or if you have a family and you have kids, it's really hard on them, right? I mean, you're working 12, 15, 16-hour days for years, and you have a family or you have a partner, and they don't always love that. And how do you balance? People talk about work-life balance, but founder work-life balance is like this. It's really hard to balance that out. So we talk a lot about that and how to help that, and one of I call it my greatest hits. The two greatest hits of things that founders come to me with of personal problems are, one, I hate my co-founder, and two, my wife or partner wants to throw me out the window, right? Those are the two biggest issues.
How do you deal with that? What do you tell them?
Well, we just try to work through what the specific issues are by asking questions. Like, there's a genesis to all of these, and then, how do you talk to one another? What can you do better? What do you feel guilty about? Because there's a lot of guilt in doing this, right? And you feel torn commitments to your investors or your team or your product and your family, right? How do you balance that out?
I'm sure that if they all got to this place, they didn't set the expectation in advance. I think so.
Yeah.
But what do you do then? Yeah, I'm stuck. I didn't set the expectations.
Right.
How can I fix it now? Because I'm just repeating.
Yeah.
I hate my co-founder, and my wife or my partner is giving me a shit of time. What do we do? Close the business?
Well, it depends. It depends. Every case is different. There's no, turn to page 317 and there's an answer, right? Each individual person has their own personalities and issues and strengths and weaknesses, and we try to untangle what's going on, like at home. Like, what does your partner want? What do you want? What kinds of commitments had you made? What do you feel bad about? What kinds of things can you do, even just baby steps to start to kind of untangle that, take the charge out of it a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And it's similar with a co-founder, but it's serious on a different level too, because you're tied up with them sometimes financially, sometimes emotionally on a different level. If you're a marketing person and your co-founder is an engineer, you're already talking different languages, right? And they have different expectations, and if you hate each other and this is just going to be constant friction, what gives? What can you do? Do you walk? Do you ask them to leave? Do you go to a third party to do kind of couples therapy, right? The equivalent of couples coaching there, which sometimes I do. You talk to both sides to try to understand is it a communication issue or is it a more fundamental issue than that, right? And often it's a communications issue, that I speak in this language and you're speaking in that language, and we may be saying very similar things, but our heads are wired differently, so we're not even hearing it.
And then you hope in that situation you have good paperwork that claws back some shares
exactly.
in the separation.
Exactly.
That's
right.
been coming up. So looking at your career, it's, I label you a generalist. That's me doing it to you. Do you agree? Because
oh yeah.
And how was that a plan? It just happens to you? Like, how do you look back on it now and kind of see that journalism as being a superpower?
I feel like I'm like the product of a traditional mid-'80s American liberal arts education. Lots of stuff interests me. So that's part of what got me here and part of why I'm a generalist. I read a lot. I watch a lot of movies still. I like talking to people. I like going to new places and trying new stuff. And I think the trying new stuff is probably what makes me a generalist, I guess, because I don't get bored easily, but I like to try new things, and I like to tinker, and I like to experiment. I cook a lot, and so part of that comes out of my cooking. What happens here?
What do you like to cook?
I cook everything. I try everything, right? Like, okay, I'll do Spanish food this week, or, I'll do some, Bangladeshi food over here, or I'll try some West African food over there. What I cook most frequently, I cook Mexican food because it's hard to get good Mexican food in Southeast Asia, and generally I can cook it better than what I can buy and for a lot less money.
Like fajitas and this type of things?
No, more like
So you're saying your food is better than Sunrise Tacos?
It could be. It could be.
We can test
That's a chain.
It could be run by Filipinos, right? It's not even Mexicans, right? But I mean, actually, that isn't bad. But what do I make? Gosh, I do a lot of carnitas. I like carnitas because I get a big pork shoulder, and I can cook a lot of it, right? And then I can freeze it and have it, and then make burritos out of it or other kinds of things, right? So I do that. Put a pot of beans on all day.
Should be a food show.
Yeah,
Stop.
exactly.
I'm getting hungry.
We're generalists. We can do everything.
Yeah, exactly. We can do Chef Paul, We can do that.
I like it. Better call Paul, but
Better
about
call
food.
Paul, right. Better call Pablo. And because Better Call Pablo, right.
Love it.
I'm going to go to the startup scene in Bangkok.
Okay.
And I'm going to speak about it. I want to talk about the cyber scene in Singapore. And I'm going to try together with you to do a comparison from your point of view. I want you to try to be free of talk, but still...
Not get kicked out of Thailand.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So what's your take?
Or ejected out of Singapore, either way.
Right. That's true. So a little history here, if we can go back a little bit. Singapore has been really, really good about consciously building this ecosystem, right? And if you were doing this 15, 20 years ago, there were programs in Singapore that just didn't work. And if you were a failed founder, you'd have to pay the money back to the government. I mean, it started there. Over the years, they learned how to do it, and they got really good at it. They were great at building this ecosystem and not realizing that they're not the ones giving the money, but there's a tier of VCs that they invest in who then make the investment rather than the government doing it. It's really easy to start a company here. Like, in 4 hours, you can have a private limited company set up here, right? It's boom, boom, boom. That's clean and clear. The laws, the investment laws are clean and clear. So they've done a lot of work to making that happen, okay? And not only Thailand, but I think if you look at Southeast Asia in general, other countries look at Singapore and want to be like Singapore. But it's hard. Every country is different. And Singapore is small and has a small, very nimble government. But a place, and I'm not comparing, but I'm just saying Indonesia is different and the Philippines are different. And the way that the governments are, it's very hard to make those kinds of changes quickly, right? Or to get the consensus that this is where we need to be going. Singapore's been very good about targeting industries and saying, okay, we're going to go there. Whether it was biotech or broadcasting or whatever, investment banking, they focused on it and they made it very easy for those companies to thrive here. So that's kind of the groundwork. And as a result, there's a lot of venture money here. There were accelerators, there were founders, now there's family offices, right, as it evolves. Thailand does not have that as much, okay? The Thailand scene is very different. A lot of the venture money comes from corporate VCs, CVCs, who are focused on, as we talked about before, having companies that feed into what they do. So if you're PTT or if you're Siam Cement or you're one of the banks, you invest in companies that can help you that way. One of the things also that I think is an inhibitor is that because that's where the money comes from and that's what the focus of your big investors are, there's not as much of a push to go outside of Thailand. So, you can't name too many Thai companies that have got an escape velocity.
Yeah,
right?
Regional or global.
Exactly. Because there's, the goal of the investor has been met, okay? Compare with VCs here who want to see you grow big, because that's how they pay back their partners, right? Their investors, right? So you have to get that 100 times, that 10,000 times, X to be able to raise to justify being a venture investor, right? Yeah. The need is not there. So you bring in an outside, like Singapore VC, and the goals are different from the investors, right? Their trajectories are very different. So I think that's an issue there. Not too many non-CVCs on the ground in Thailand. The government focus is not as concentrated on this as it is in Singapore. Thailand they change governments regularly, let's just say, okay? And, there's different priorities and a startup ecosystem may not be in the top 10, right? It could be number 27 of things to do. So I think that the government leadership is in building a national ecosystem for entrepreneurship is really important, and it's not that important in Thailand. You see how in Indonesia, they got a public-private partnership, goal like 7 or 8 years ago, and indeed that's flourished, right? So Indonesia now has a very strong ecosystem. Philippines is doing it now. Vietnam has its own flavor of that, but the government has a very active hands-on role to encourage that. Yeah, you're not seeing that as much in Thailand.
And if you kind of take all of this knowledge and experience you've had in the ecosystem, and then you kind of look at where we are today, what do you think the next decade of the startup scene looks like? And how would you wrap your head around where can we go from here, especially now in light of what's happened in the political scene in America, which I think will have an effect on some of this stuff. We probably just don't know what the effect is, but it's probably coming.
I think even he doesn't know yet. He's going to be very surprised.
I know, that's the scary.
He's going to be very surprising.
I'm trying to have a positive attitude towards it.
Well,
but we've had, like, you read the Lightspeed Ventures thing, where it's kind of like, hey, look back on the 10 years. Wasn't great, right? Lots of money in, no issues with capital. I don't think anybody complained there wasn't money raised. It's more of like, what did we do with it? What is your viewpoint on That,
Well, I think it's changing. Obviously, it's changing. I think those days of that easy money and that, lots of VCs with lots of money, those are gone. So on the supply side, call that the supply side, the demand side being the founders. I think a lot of founders are also realizing that they don't have to follow the venture route, that whole, I must scale, growth at all costs. So take all that money and try to get big, may not be right for the company that they're building, either personally or the vertical that they're in or the product that they're offering, right? And that maybe being a profitable SME, for the lack of a better word, is fine. A normal company.
Be a good business.
Yeah, have a nice business that grows at 10-15% annually is fine, perfectly fine. Takes care of your family, takes care of your employees. You're not killing yourself over it. There's not all this external pressure. So I think we'll see more of that. I think that also, yes, we've gotten 40 minutes into this without saying the 2 letters, but we're going to use the 2 letters now. Okay.
Go ahead.
And
3, 2, 1.
AI, is going to change how this works, because it's going to change how companies, the kinds of companies that are being built and how we build them. And maybe you don't need that big team, or maybe, who knows really. But, it's this tool that will fundamentally change how businesses are built and run. We can say that safely. And I think that will affect then how what kinds of startups we'll see, and what kind of startups you do. I think there are big tech kinds of startups like biotech or, health tech or food tech on a big scale, space, oceans, that are going to require a lot of money because the technology requires a lot of money. So we'll still see that kind of big investment because it's necessary to grow those companies. But I don't think, I'm sorry?
Cyber?
Yeah. I just don't see that all companies need to follow that path anymore, right? And I think everybody in the ecosystem is understanding that.
And I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think it's a healthy.
Well, hopefully we're getting smarter,
when you have
right?
a market correction, like I call a health restoring correction. I think this is a health restoring correction, and maybe how the ecosystem works, and a focus on building better businesses, and maybe having to make money rather than raise money. It's not a terrible thing. Right?
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Yeah. But I'm sure it affects certain people individually different based on what stage they were at in dealing with this change, right?
Sure. I mean, if I'm a, Series B, Series C company, and I thought I was doing the right thing, and all of a sudden, the rug has been pulled out, and the game has changed, and the goalposts are, now it's a net, not a goalpost, and you're like, whoa, what do I do?
What do I do?
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah, we're gonna
do it.
Gonna wrap it up.
Okay.
And we're gonna go to our routines. We have our usual question that we ask, and I think for you it's gonna be an interesting one, because I haven't a gas in my stomach, but I don't know what my head is thinking about it.
You're thinking carnitas.
If you're gonna go back to your 20 years old, what you would tell him?
Say yes more. Definitely say yes more. That I said no because I was scared of what might happen. Don't do stupid stuff, right? Don't jump off this cliff. Don't light that on fire. But I think I turned down a lot of opportunities that I could have said yes to, and that those are my regrets, that I talked myself out of it. And I have 3 kids, and I think they'll tell you that I tell them this endlessly, is to, say yes more and take advantage of those opportunities. Because you think when you're in your 20s, they're going to come back. They don't come back, right? And you've missed that train, that boat, whatever analogy you want to use. But that would be the one that I'd say.
And
say
you
yes
say
more.
no because you're fearful?
Yeah.
Risk.
Risk. I don't know if I can do it. Well, you know what? As all the cool stuff we've all done is stuff that we didn't know we could do, right? At the end of the day, we've taken those chances, and we've stretched, and we've learned, and we've bumped our heads, but we've built or done cool, big, successful things, right?
Yeah. So I know you do Founder Circle. And I think some of that in your coaching is related to wellness around founders. But what do you do for yourself?
Since I moved to Bangkok, I've really focused on myself. So I've lost weight. I go to the gym regularly now. I'm 3-4 times at the gym a week. I've fallen in love with the rowing machine, which most people hate. But because I listen to audiobooks, it's the perfect combination of, zone 2 and zone out at the same time. I can do those things. I do weights. I do intermittent fasting. Keto doesn't work for me, but intermittent fasting has been very successful. I lost about 14, 15 kilos.
Congrats.
Wow.
I brought my blood pressure down. So I'm paying attention to that. And then as a young person, I really disliked keeping a journal. I just wasn't good at writing those things. But what I've started to do now is I do an audio journal. And I use otter.ai, but different people use, everybody has a product that does transcription now. And I try to do 5 minutes every morning. I do it in the morning and just do that brain dump of what happened over the day, these different thoughts that come out. And I find that it really clears the page. And if I don't do it for 3 or 4 days, I can actually feel a difference. I actually know that I have to get back to getting all the crap out of my head.
Yeah, what do they call that? Something page. The writers call that something pages. I forget.
Yeah.
It's just the idea
morning
of like
pages
morning pages.
Right,
You don't have to have an agenda. You just
exactly get it out of your head.
Just do something.
And I don't even go back and look at the transcriptions. 98% of the time, I don't do that.
Okay.
You're
it's
saving
just
them though.
Yeah, I am saving them, and we'll see what happens to them.
In 20 years from now, we can look at it. Yeah, in 20 years from now.
Or I feed them into some AI and say, "Tell me who I am." I mean, there's all sorts of cool stuff that you could do, right? I mean, who am I?
Enlighten me.
Yeah, define me. Here's 17
years,
hours of me yakking. Who am I? What's my life philosophy? Yeah. Sometimes I use those tools if I have an idea and I want to write an article or design a course or a workshop. I'll use that to brainstorm. Initially, just get it out of my head. But I find that that's super helpful for me and clears me up a lot.
That's very cool. I like it.
So, last one. I don't know if you have time for that. Do you watch something that you like or read something?
I read a lot. I read. I do audiobooks all the time. I wash the dishes. I'm on the train. On the, whatever, I'm lifting weights, I'm always reading. So, and I bounce back and forth between fiction and nonfiction. Yeah. So this year, I just finished Anna Karenina, how you pronounce it, which is 43 action-packed hours of audiobook.
It's that long.
It was that long. It was that long. It was great, but it's a slog, And I read a lot. I've been reading a lot about American history and American politics this year. Obviously, it's kind of a big year for that. Yeah. And a book that I read that I really, really liked was called The Kingdom and the Power of the Glory. It was about the rise of evangelical Republican politics.
Oh, I heard this. The guy interviewed the other day, and it was quite interesting.
It was really good.
He talks about how they've kind of like slid into their power position.
Exactly.
Right?
And he's evangelical. He was brought up as an evangelical church. So it's really interesting to hear that because I'm none of the above. So that was really good. But the best book I read this year was called The Tiger. Have you heard about this book? Okay, It's about Siberian tigers. It's based on a true story. It is a true story. Siberian tigers are really smart, as it turns out, maybe the smartest mammals out there. And this one tiger went and selectively killed people who had of a family that had harmed him and his family. Wow. So you learn about the tigers, you learn about Soviet Asia way up there, Irkutsk and stuff like that, which we kind of don't know anything about. Yeah. We learn about the biology, we learn about the ecology, there's geopolitics going on, and tigers, right? It was a great book.
Interesting. The Tiger is cool.
The Tiger, yeah.
Wow. I gotta check that out.
Nice.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're gonna adjourn. Paul, this is fantastic.
Great.
Thanks for the history lessons, the learning. We'll get a lot of this into the show notes. And continued success with Founder Circle and your coaching and enjoying Bangkok.
Thanks. I will. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for the opportunity. This has been great. Great fun.
It was great.